in under-resourced settings. I was the co-instructor for this course last fall, so I had a little bit of experience with the course already. So prior to COVID, this was the course that was going. It was the Elements of Neuroscience and Neuroanatomy, and it was a 6-credit course condensed into the fall semester. We had 2 to 3 instructors of record. It was mandatory for students in both the OT and physio programs. This was approximately 130 students. The mark had primarily been based on 3 exams, so 2 midterms and a 40% final, and then there was a 10% interprofessional education project. So I kind of got my head wrapped around that last fall when I taught it for the first time, and then I was told I was teaching it in the summer, and I had about 3 weeks notice to get it ready to go. So I had some main worries, and these were them. The first one was essentially how to teach. So I knew that the traditional lectures that I had prepared for last fall likely wouldn't work. And I also wasn't really sure how I was going to assess students, because I didn't think the traditional exams would work either. And like most people, I think I was mostly concerned that people were going to cheat or lose their academic integrity, I guess is a different way of saying that. And then I was really uncertain of how I was going to keep students interested and engaged without the classroom. So typically when I teach, I would do things like quiz people on various swimming-related trivia, or you know, things like this, superimpose my face up there with my most favorite hockey player in the world. So I didn't know if I could really do that in an online setting. And so I was really concerned about how to keep students interested and engaged. And I find that neuroscience is challenging for this at the best of times. And so while everyone was sitting at home being very concerned about catching COVID, I was sitting at home being very concerned about how to get this course going. So I thought, okay, well, what am I going to do here? So I went on to this website, which many of you have probably seen, the Center for Learning and Teaching. And the first thing I saw, or which you might see, is that they have a variety of webinars and online workshops available. And I guess this would be one of them. But at that time, I was panicking, and I was thinking, like, look, I really don't have time for webinars or online workshops. But I saw that they had this handy website here. So I clicked on that, the online teaching one. And it was like it was taunting me, because all I saw was this little bit here that said start early. And I was thinking, well, I don't have time to start early. I have to do this in about 3 weeks. So I decided up here, there's some core principles. And these bullets are still up here. So you can click on that core principle. And then what you'll see is they give you these core principles for online teaching. And I thought, okay, great. This is a good way to start. So I clicked here on this, you know, where students are expecting an accessible and an inclusive online course. And after a few clicks, I got to this thing. And I was thinking, well, this is all great, but everything, all the resources that were popping up for me all seemed to be sort of one step ahead. Like, I didn't even have a Brightspace course. I had no idea what I was doing, and they were giving me all these principles. So I was getting a little bit frustrated and quite overwhelmed. So I went back to this main page, and I noticed this circle here. And what it said is, we are here to help. Get in touch whenever you have questions about online teaching. So I thought, great, I have a lot of questions. So I emailed them, just like Les said, nice, calm email. Made it sound like I totally knew what I was talking about. But actually, I was just sitting at home panicking, thinking, please, God, someone has to email me back, because I literally have no idea what I'm doing. And it turns out Les did. This guy here, in case you couldn't see his picture when he was talking to you, this is Les. And so what we ended up doing was we met once a week for the 3 weeks or maybe 4 weeks I had prior to the course starting. And he really helped me out sort of building the framework for the course. And so that's what I'm going to talk about today. I'm just going to take you through what we did together. And we did actually use the principles of, or the universal design principles for learning guidelines. And they are actually more helpful in practice than you would necessarily, or than necessarily thought, you know, at first glance. And so what we looked through was, you know, this column here is the what, like the what are we teaching, the content, and how are we teaching it. This here is the how. So we have the what are we teaching, the how are we teaching, and then we look at the why are we teaching. So I'll use this as I go through the next half an hour or so of how we built the course up. And so what I thought I would do was frame this presentation through my main worries, because in meeting with some of the other faculty in the OT department, it sort of seems like these are everyone's main worries, or at least these two. I'm not sure if this one so much, but at least how to teach and how to assess seem to be pertinent worries. So I figured we'd start with this one, the how to teach. So looking through these core principles of online teaching, we've already kind of been through the first one, which is this accessible and inclusive. And so that's this, essentially. And then the next one of the other principles is that, you know, online teaching and online learning needs to be flexible. And I'm not sure if you can see here, but this is where we get into things like, should the course be synchronous or should the course be asynchronous? And so there's a lot of conversation about that right now. And it says here that most courses should be primarily asynchronous. And so that means that you're using a lot of pre-recorded things. And so that was a bit of a struggle for me, to be honest, because I'm typically used to a little bit of a routine. You know, I lecture on Mondays, I lecture on Wednesdays, and then, you know, I have my office hours, and we sort of go on like that. And so in talking with Les, we figured there's no reason why I can't still have a weekly schedule. If not, maybe it's not for the students, maybe they don't need it, but I felt I needed it to get my way through. And so I think we'll just start by, or not I think, I know, because I made this presentation, we're just going to walk through this weekly schedule. Okay, so the first thing I did every week was I would put up a weekly overview. And I did this for a few reasons. One, both Les and this online teaching core principles told me I had to. It's clear communication, and you can see one of the tenets here is it says, clear communication is especially important in an online environment. Courses should begin with an orientation or welcome module that will introduce the course and its components, and should also include weekly announcements and a clear weekly calendar. So that's what I did. I put these weekly announcements up. And so this is a little bit of this is a snapshot of part of my Brightspace course, and I'll go into some of the other aspects in a little bit. But you can see here that here would be my weekly overviews. This is week 7, and the first thing the students would see when we popped into week 7 on June 15th would be this week 7 overview. And then the overview would say things like this, little pump up comment, you know, we're halfway through. And then I would have anything that I would normally put in the announcement section or at the beginning of a course, you know. So letting them know they'd just written their midterm, so the marks of the midterm will be published soon. Saying, yep, we got your project, and so I'll talk about that in a little bit more about the project. And then, you know, that week I'd been having some troubles with Panopto. It was freezing on me, and a few other things. So I didn't know if they'd been noticing that, but I wanted to let them know that we were trying to fix it. And then I'd let them know a little bit about the modules. So I would let them know, just so you know, we have 3 coming this week. One was from Bill, which was a guest lecturer I had for the neuroanatomy. And then 2 were from me. And then I would also say, you know, for example, 4-year planning, the vision module is exceptionally long, and then the eye movement module is quite short, just so they could plan their time through the week. So you can see here, there's that weekly overview, and then this would be the content. So these would be the 3 content modules. And this was the part that was really getting me. I could do a weekly overview, that was no problem, but it was actually the content, like how was I actually going to teach the content? So I knew that I wanted to have all the content up on Mondays, and so that had been recommended as well. Try and get all the content up at the beginning of the week so the students can plan themselves. But how to actually teach that content was a bit worrying to me, because I was used to doing a 1 or a 2-hour lecture with a little bit of a break in between, and I had all my stuff, I had all the information, but I just wasn't sure how I was going to roll that out. So again, I think I'll just take you through the Brightspace course that I had. What you can see here is I had the calendar up top here, so it would say the day and whatever was coming up. So, you know, upcoming events, if we had a quiz or a midterm or something, I had the announcements here. But then this is all the content here. So the students could click on whatever week we were on. So let's say they clicked on a week, and then what you'll see is that you can see here we have all the weeks. And so we're looking at week 6 here, for example. I had week 6 overview, and then I had the 3 content modules listed here. And so this course may be a little bit different than others in that we had a lot of different topics to cover. And so what I chose to do was each topic was a different module. So you can see we had neuroanatomy here, then we had the neuroscience of touch or sensation, and then the neuroscience of pain. So each topic was its own module. And so looking at touch, for example, this is a bit of a busy one, but looking at touch, this would be everything that I posted for the touch module. So all this stuff would be what I would typically lecture on in an hour. So this would be an hour-long lecture, you know, pre-COVID. And then in my online version, I had all this stuff instead. So you can see at the top, I had a PDF of my PowerPoint. And so that I always put up there, just like you would typically put up at the beginning of your lecture, or you would post on Brightspace for your lectures. I would still have that PDF there. And then I would have some of these Panopto videos, and I'll talk a little bit about those in a minute, but those are just the voiceover PowerPoints, kind of like what I'm doing now. And the key thing for those was that none of those would be longer than 15 minutes. Everything that I read said that they really shouldn't be longer than 12 to 15 minutes. So I made sure that they were not longer than 15 minutes. And then interspersed throughout there, I had some other things. So for example, here, I had this interactive module. And I was lucky because UBC actually has quite a nice online platform for some of their neuroscience and some of their anatomy components. And so they had these interactive modules for different neuroscience pathways. And so you can see this one here. There's a lot. I'll just take you through a bit of it. This was the first slide. And then it would have a little bit of like a showing where things were. And then as you get down the interactive module, there would be little quizzes the students can do. So for them to do this whole module, it'll probably take them about 20 minutes. And so I touched briefly on the anatomy of this in my Panopto lecture, but said to go here for more details. So I'd have, first they watch this, or they watch this Panopto video, then they would do this interactive module. And then I had a few more videos, and then I put up a YouTube video actually in this section. And this is just a clinical tool that we use. And the nice thing about putting videos up is it's a different voice. So it's not just me talking all the time, and they have different animations and stuff. And it was also really helpful for me to demonstrate clinical things. So typically I would put a few slides up about this Asia exam and talk about it, but I would never have the time in a face-to-face lecture to have a simulated patient and actually show how it's done. So this video was really nice because it showed some clinical relevance for us. And then actually for this module as well, I had extra resources. So this pathway, the PCML pathway, is a pathway that I was using a lot throughout the semester as a base model, which I'll talk about in a minute. So I really wanted to make sure that they knew it. And so what I'd found on YouTube was this drawing YouTube video, and essentially this person here is drawing out the pathway, and the students could follow along. And this was really nice as well, because I find for a lot of the neuroscience or anatomy things, you do a little bit better drawing things out necessarily than by writing it. So this was good for those students that felt drawing it out would solidify their knowledge. And so this is sort of the base way all the modules were laid out. So this is one example. And then here's another one. So this is week 8. We're in week 8 now, and you can see here that we still have the week overview. And then again, I had 3 more modules here. And then this is cognitions. This is module 33. You can see it's a little bit shorter, but it has the same basic principles. I start out with a PDF document of my Panopto videos, and so there's 2 Panopto videos. I had a YouTube video in there, and then I ended up having a podcast as well. So for this section, the clinical relevance for things I thought was pretty important. And so rather than me talking about them, which I did do a couple of little clinical excerpts here and here, but it was better for them to see real patients talking about things. And so that's why I put these ones in here.
Amira,
but essentially, yeah.
I was going to say we have a couple questions.
Okay.
I didn't mean to interrupt at a weird time.
No, good. It's a bit odd being back here because I have no idea what's going on the other side.
Okay, yeah, so one question is, did you post the PowerPoints without a voiceover and do the Panopto video that has sections of the PowerPoints?
Yeah, so this PDF document was a PDF of my PowerPoint. And so that had no voiceover. And then I would divide it into parts. So the first part I did a voiceover, and then the second part I did a voiceover, but both these 2 parts were essentially this one PDF document divided into 2. Okay. Does that answer the question?
Yep, excellent. And then about the interactive activity from UBC,
yeah.
Can you talk more about how you found that, or?
Well, I found it a few ways. One, I'm a UBC alum, so I did my research degree at UBC, so I used to tutor in the neuroscience program there, so I knew that stuff was available, but it's open source, and so anyone can go onto the UBC website and look through those things, and they have it for neuroscience and for neuroanatomy and for anatomy. I'm not sure about other programs, but it was all, and similar to Dal, this course is very similar to the medical students neuroscience course. And so I was on the School of Medicine's website at UBC and found all this stuff.
Thanks.
And they also had a bunch of YouTube videos that I used as well that were really interesting. And it was all open source, so I wasn't stealing it. I did reference it, but I wasn't stealing it. Any other questions?
Nope, perfect. I'll interrupt you again, I'm sure.
Oh, feel free. Okay. And so as we were just talking about, actually, this would be the PDF document, and then we had these Panopto videos. And so Panopto was a bit of a bane of my existence for a while because I couldn't get it to work on my computer. And then I actually found it was really tricky, sort of actually like now, to do these Panopto videos, because typically when you're lecturing in front of a class, you have a bit of an idea of what's going on behind the scenes. And here, sort of like, as I said, right now, I've got no idea. So you just end up really talking to yourself for 10 to 15 minutes at a time, which is a little bit unnerving, but you do get used to it after a while. So these are some key points for my Panopto videos. It's a voice recording over a PowerPoint, and as I said, as I said quite a few times, is I really tried to keep them shorter than 15 minutes because that was sort of the golden rule and everything I was Googling that said you don't want it to be longer than 15 minutes maximum. And then the things I Googled also said it's nice to have many sources of engagement. And so what I mean by that in this context is as I was going through the PowerPoint, I would say things like, this would be a very good thing for you to memorize. Or if I was showing a picture, I'd say, you can find this and a little bit more explanation, on page 627 in the textbook. I often would have learning objectives, which I'll show you in a minute. And then I had self-quizzes, and I was continually drawing on things I had spoken about previously. So as an example here, this would be the PDF of my Panopto. And so students would get these slides here, and then it would kind of go in big like this, sort of as you see it now. This is what they would see. So each of my Panopto videos would start with the learning objectives for that video. So here I had 3 key learning objectives that they needed to have out of this module, the cognition module. And then I'd also intersperse, as I went through, some quizzes. So you can see, I don't know if you can tell here, but this would be part 2, for example, and this would be the finishing of part 1. And then I would take a break. So this would be 15 minutes, I'd take a break, and then we'd start in part 2. And so at the end of part 1, I had a self-test for the students. So I wanted them to be able to describe or draw the route of that pathway. They had to give me a definition, and I'd walk them through the quiz as I am right now. I'd want them to be able to tell me the 4 steps of sensory transduction, and then they should be able to list these 3 common properties of mechanoreceptors. So I would do things like this, or I would do things like this. I'd be talking about this was the pain lecture, and so I had talked about the sensation or the touch lecture in the previous one, and I wanted them to be able to tell me what are similar about these 2 pathways and what are different about these 2 pathways. And so I'd let them know, okay, well, there should be 4 differences, and you should be able to find 2 similarities. And then if they couldn't get this, I would say, okay, well, this is what you need to review. And Dr. Baldridge was the man who came in and did our neuroanatomy lectures. He did 6 of those. You can review your notes there and or look at the extra resources. So if you weren't able to get this stuff just by my lecture, you should fill in the blanks with this stuff.
Amira, we have another question.
Yep.
In terms of the Panopto videos, when you did the voice recording, did you find that in your research or reading that not including a video of yourself was a better option versus just the voice?
No, actually, the contrary is true. They all recommended putting a video of yourself in, much like I am here. So a little video of yourself and then doing it like this. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, so was it just based on your comfort that you decided not to include a
Oh, well, yes. I should have included a video of myself, and often I did not include a video of myself. Yeah, mostly based on my comfort. But you were supposed to include a video of yourself.
Perfect, thanks.
And as I was saying, one of the other things was that one of the other recommendations was continually draw on previous knowledge. And so this here was that PCML pathway that I'd ask them to memorize. And then I would link everything to that, sort of saying, okay, well, this is the base pathway. and this is the correlation, you know, and this would be the visual system, this would be the correlation here. So I constantly referred back to things that I had already spoken about. And then I would do things, you know, you can see here, we've done a summary, I finished the learning objectives, and then sometimes I would finish on a sample multiple choice question that I might put on a quiz. I would talk through, okay, here's the question. I would give them a minute before I circled the answer. You know, some of them were a bit funny, like I literally have no clue, other of them weren't, but often these questions would show up on one of the quizzes. And so it was useful for them to then watch through to the end of the 15 minutes. And so I found by doing all this stuff, what it did was it really, I was trying to hit off a lot of these boxes along here. And so I don't know if this is written really small for you or not. I can't read on my screen. I'm not sure if you can or not. But if you look up here, it says provide options for perception. And so here it says offer alternatives for auditory information, offer alternatives for visual information. And so I think by the interactive modules and the drawing modules, I was really trying to key in on these things here. And then down where it says provide options for comprehension, one of the things it says is activate or supply background knowledge. So I often was reviewing things that we had already spoken about. It says highlight patterns, critical features, and big ideas. And so I'd often use a base model, like that PCML pathway, for example, was my base model as I went through the course. And maximize transfer and generalization. And so I'd often then talk about, okay, well, for example, this is the base module, and then show how that's different or similar as we went through other things. And so I think the take-home messages of how to teach are these things, is you really want to keep it short and sweet. So all those things, even the YouTube videos and the podcasts, I tried to keep everything to less than 15 minutes. And then use as many different sources of information as possible. So the Panopto lectures, the YouTube videos, interactive videos, and if you can't find those, you know, a lot of different mini quizzes and things like that. So we talked a little bit about how to teach, and then let's look now at how to assess. And I was really worried about using traditional exams. And so before COVID, this is what the assessment looked like of the course. We had 3 exams and 1 group project. With Les's help, we ended up coming up with this assessment structure. And so you can see here that there's 12 assessments versus 4 assessments. And so the bulk of the assessments before COVID was exams, and you can see here the bulk of this now was a project. And so why did I decide to go with the final project, other than Les telling me that I should? Well, typically we had a 40% cumulative final exam before, and I found with that being online, it was a really high stake. So there was a lot of things that could go wrong with that. It was, first of all, it was a lot of pressure on the students. And then there was, you know, I had to worry about things like technology and internet stability. So I had some students, you know, up in Port aux Basques, Newfoundland, and so they were telling me that their internet wasn't very good. And then, of course, I was worried a fair bit about academic integrity. And so if you see here, prior to COVID, there was actually this 10% interprofessional education project. So I actually just took that project and really just blew it up and expanded it. And so before, it had been a group project with 6 people, and it had been a mix of OTs and physios. It was a group project that had 3 OTs and 3 physios. And then the final outcome was a paper that was submitted in a 20-minute oral presentation. And the point of this project was to expose the class to various neurotherapeutics and give them some interprofessional experience, so have the OTs working with the physios. And so the purpose for this project during the online version of this course was the same. It was to expose students to these different neurotherapies. But there were some key elements that were really important to me, which we hadn't been able to do previously. One was I wanted to give the students some choice. And so prior to this, because they'd been put in groups, they were just assigned different topics. So I really wanted them to have a bit of choice because I thought maybe it would increase their interest in neuroscience. And then I wanted to provide options for multiple means of expression. And that's the far right column on that multicolored graph, which I'll show you again in a minute. And so what I did was I had 26 different topics plus an other section, so students could come up with their own topic. And I used an opinion survey to rank their 5 choices. And so you can see here's a list of some of the topics here, and the students just had to rank them 1 to 5. I didn't just let the students pick one topic because I needed to make sure that all the topics were covered, because I needed to maintain class exposure to the information. And actually doing it this way had some surprising results. So the physios, actually, a lot of the physios were interested in things like exercise with mental health, which I hadn't really expected. And a lot of the OTs actually ended up looking at some of the stuff up here, like the transcranial direct current stimulation, for example, which typically seems like a more physio type thing. But a lot of the OTs were interested in the robotics and a lot of this sort of basic musculature stuff. So it was kind of nice that instead of me just giving them what I thought they'd like, they actually went in and chose their own stuff. And so when I said I scaffolded it, it was this 45% scaffolding project. The point of that was because it wasn't actually, it was a fairly complex assignment. And so what this did was we broke it into these smaller components. And then we provided feedback on each component. And this did a few things. It ensured the students were on track. So in time and content, they weren't left to it all at the very end. And it built their critical thinking skills. So the first step was just merely a literature summary. And then the last step was I really wanted to know what their clinical opinion was. And it also allowed for some cumulative assessment. So it also satisfied that need for having a cumulative assessment that was weighted rather heavily. And so these were the 4 steps. And I'll just walk you through those super quickly. There was a literature review, which was 5%, and that was just for the students to gain some general information. They just had to hand in a half-page summary of the articles. There was 2 articles they had to choose, a half-page summary and a half-page article critique. And both the classes were taking their research methods courses at that time, and so it actually drew on some of the other knowledge they were getting. And then the second step was I wanted a neuroscience overview of the patient population. So this was I really wanted to cement the neuroscience principles they'd been learning in class, and I wanted them to be able to understand the specific patient population they had chosen. So in the interest of time, I don't think I'm going to read through this, but this was the instructions for step number 2. And what I want to highlight is that I really wanted them to submit something that they felt best reflected their learning. So I said, if you wish to include a diagram or drawings as part of your submission, please do so. There will not be a penalty if you do not include artwork, nor will there be preference given to those who do. And so I'd actually got some really, really good submissions. And so these are just 2 examples. This was from one of the OT students on the left, and then this mind map here was from one of the physio students. And this was all they submitted. And they actually got full marks for this because it showed me that they really understood the pathways that they were talking about rather than writing a 2-page descriptor. And then the third step was this educational artifact. So how does this neurotherapeutic work? And this was the most interesting step, actually. And these were due throughout the term. We interspersed them throughout the term. But this was the objective, okay? It was to provide a snapshot of the chosen neurotherapy for your classmates. It should be presented in such a way that is interesting for your classmates to learn. And so they were not allowed to submit a typical paper. So that we were looking for a few main things that they had to include. And what we got out of it was we got 128 very unique submissions. And so we got voiceover PowerPoint presentations, much like the Panoptos. I had a few YouTube videos put together, some mind maps, some educational pamphlets, and some infographics. And so we chose 30 of those that were a good representation of all the topics that we wanted the class to learn about. And so those were then posted up for discussion, which I'll talk about in a minute as well. But the main point about step number 3 was that it was again tapping into the students had to submit something that wasn't a written piece of work. So, you know, typically students submit essays or papers, and we wanted to make sure that students could express their learning however they wanted to. And then the 4th step was a final paper, a scientific paper. And so this project actually highlighted 2 things. It sort of checked a few of these boxes, and it checked a few of these boxes here. And so if we look at provide options for multiple means of action and expression, here it says vary the methods for response and navigation. So students could submit whatever they wanted using multiple media for communication here. And so all these things, that's what I was trying to get at the project, was for the students to express themselves as they felt they best could. So that was the project. We also had a few quizzes and exams. And so the quizzes and exams generally were, or not generally, they were all multiple choice and true and false because they were we did them through the Brightspace course. I had quizzes, and I'll show you them in a minute. They were non-cumulative, so they were bi-weekly every 2 weeks. They were open for 24 hours, but you only had 1 hour to complete your quiz. And the purpose of the quiz was to keep the students on track. So I find in this course, students leave everything to the end and they try and study, but I felt, when they're sitting at home by themselves, panicking at the end wasn't going to be a good idea. So it really made sure the students were kept on track, and we used it as a learning tool. So the answers were released to the questions after everyone had finished the test, so they could see where they went wrong. And what that did here is you can see that under engagement, provide options for self-regulation. I tried to blow this up, but it develops self-assessment and reflection, facilitates personal coping skills and strategies. And so I really found that these quizzes every 2 weeks kept students on top of their coursework. And then the midterm and final exam were a little bit different. They were cumulative. So the midterm, we just looked at all of, obviously, the first half, and then the final exam was cumulative of the whole course. And these were synchronous exams, so everyone wrote them at the exact same time. And the purpose of this was consolidation of information, and so we didn't release any of the answer questions. So some tips for quizzes and exams when you're going through Brightspace is there's some tools. You can randomize the answers, you can randomize the questions, and then the key is to create questions that rely on application rather than memorization. So it's not very easy for the students to go and look up the answers. And then I added a little bit of time pressure. So I had 43 questions in an hour. So if students were trying to look up all the answers, they just didn't have the time to do that. And actually the Focus blog, which is you can get that through the CLT, there's some really good tips in this article here. Most of these is just flush it out a little bit more with some more details. And then the last part of the assessment was we had 2 discussion board marks. And this is where I was trying to get the students to talk to each other a little bit more, the interprofessional learning, the OTs and the physios. And so we actually divided the students into groups of 12. And so each group could only see their own writing. So they could only talk to each other and see each other's own responses. And so we did 2 clinical applications for this mark. So there's a case study at midterm that they discussed as a group, and they got 5%. And then there's an educational artifact, that's step 3 of the project, that they discussed at final, and they had 5%. And so the instructions just said, please choose 2 of those 30 presentations to read or watch. And then I let them know what I was expecting of them, reporting back to their discussion group and responding to their classmates. Sorry, I'm ripping through this, but there's a lot to cover. So again, these are the assessments here. And then one thing I wanted to highlight was I got this from one of my students, and what he said was the fact that the distribution of marks and coursework are broken up into smaller chunks makes the deadlines less dreadful. If there were things that had large mark value, 25 to 40%, I would be a lot more stressed. Online learning sucks, so it's nice that marks are distributed in smaller and manageable chunks. And I was actually quite relieved to get that because there was a lot of moving parts to this course, but it did seem that students appreciated having a lot of lower stakes assessments. So we've talked a bit about how to teach, and we've talked now a little bit about how to assess, but looking at how to keep students interested and engaged, this is a bit more of a soft thing to figure out how to do. And so I tried to do it in a few different ways. I had these synchronous open tutorials. I had one on Monday and then one on Thursday. For a few reasons, it indicated here in this online teaching core principles that the course must be interactive, and so designed to encourage student interaction, either synchronously or asynchronously. And so the asynchronous interaction I had on the discussion boards, and then synchronous, I thought perhaps I could get groups of students together in these open tutorials, and then to have a bit of an instructor presence. And so I'm available asynchronously via email, but then I wanted to be available also via office hours. And so students could come at those times to ask me any questions. So I'd like to say these were super well attended. They weren't really, and I'm still trying to sort out why, but they weren't super well attended. But at least we offered them, and I'm happy we offered them, and I think looking ahead, I would offer them again. Another way I tried to keep people engaged was at the beginning of the course, I had a picture of myself and a little bit of an introduction, and I asked the students to do the same thing within their small discussion groups. Okay, and so I gave them a few instructions, and I said, please introduce yourself to your classmates, and had them introduce each other there.
One quick question, Amira. Do you have any suggestion on the optimum size for the online discussion groups?
I think I said we had groups of 12. That seemed to be pretty good. I'd say 10 to 12. I had such a big course. I had 128 people in the course, and so I didn't want to have millions of discussion groups, but I think, somewhere between 6 to 12 would be good, I would think.
Perfect, thanks.
I found a lot of the engagement strategies that I would typically use in a face-to-face lecture. At first I thought in an online style I wouldn't be able to use it, but as I kind of got more and more comfortable talking to my computer screen, I found that I relaxed a bit and I was still able to do some of the things that I would do if I was in front of the class. You know, I still was keeping, although I was keeping the lectures themselves short and sweet, I was trying to include many different sources of information, and so often I would use some of my clinical or real life examples. I found the weekly updates and announcements, you know, I would sometimes put interesting things from the news in there, or a joke, or trying to pump them up for something. The discussion board was another way for students to ask each other questions, so they kept each other engaged that way. And then my lecturing style, at the beginning, I felt I wasn't lecturing the way that I typically would, but again, as I got more comfortable, I started to insert jokes and some cartoons and different personal anecdotes. Whether they appreciate it or not, I actually have no idea, because it's hard to tell, but I did it anyway, so who knows. So these were my main worries, and I've talked about them a little bit, but then there's one thing I've sort of hit on a couple times now, and that's, how is the course going? I must have been asked that at least 10 times by the directors of physio and OT, and the answer was, I was sitting behind my computer sort of looking like this little guy, like I have no idea how the course is going, to be honest. And like I said, part of the trouble why I felt I didn't know was because I can't see anyone. So I can't see, are they rolling their eyes at me? Are they typing? Are they paying attention and typing? Because normally when you're lecturing, you can hear everyone typing like furiously if you are talking about something important. And so I'd know whether I should highlight something or not. I mean, on the bright side, nobody was falling asleep, so I don't think they were finding them boring, but you really had no feedback at all, which is a bit disconcerting. And so what Les had suggested was to do a survey and sort of see how things are going. And so that's what I did. I did this midpoint survey, and I essentially tried to keep it very to the point. You know, I want to get some feedback about the delivery of the material. So I was trying not to ask them what they thought of the actual material, or what they thought about COVID, or what they thought about anything. I just want to know the feedback about how the material was being delivered, because I felt that was something that I could change if they didn't like it. Whereas the actual content, I couldn't change the content, so I didn't ask them about that. And so these were the 3 questions I asked, very short. On a scale of 1 to 5, which of the following formats of online modules do you prefer? And so I listed these here. And then I also, as I said, I wasn't getting many people coming to these open tutorials. And so I said, we have noticed a positive correlation between the marks received on quizzes and projects and attendance at open tutorials. So how can we improve the format of those? And then I also want to know, is there any aspect of the course that they were finding particularly helpful? You'll notice I didn't say, is there any aspect of the course that you're absolutely hating? Because I really, sitting at home by myself, did not want to get those answers, so I decided to phrase it a bit differently. And so this is what the survey looked like on Brightspace. On a scale of 1 to 5, which of the following formats of online modules do you prefer? And then you can see I had these 7 different things that I'd been using, and they could put 5, really liked it, or 1, really hated it. And so then what I ended up doing, so here are the results. I had 85 students respond, and I had made it only open for about 2 or 3 days. So it was quite a closed window because I wanted to get the results up, but 70% of the class did respond, which I thought was quite a good number. I collated and summarized all the responses. I posted the responses, and then I posted my actions in response to the results. And so I'll show you here. This is what I did. You know, this is the first question. Which of the following formats of online modules do you prefer? And so as it turns out, almost 75% of people ranked the less than 10 minutes as most preferred format. High rankings were also given to self-quizzes, interactive modules, and YouTube videos. And 57%, or almost 60% of the students, ranked longer, greater than 20 minutes, as least preferred format. And so then I'd put the outcome. For the remaining 5 online modules, I'll try my best to ensure the lectures are as short as possible, hopefully keeping them between 10 and 12 minutes, and I'll include a few more self-quizzes and make sure to mix it up with interactive modules and YouTubes. So this just kind of solidified my thoughts that it was good that things were being interactive. Here, the response to the tutorial was a little bit all over the place, so I won't really go into that in too much detail, but what I did change was that I said on Mondays from 3 to 4, I'll go over the preceding week's quiz, because it seemed like a lot of people wanted to review the quizzes. And I also said people could email me questions ahead of time, so I would let them know that I was discussing those questions in the tutorials. I still haven't quite figured out this aspect of the course yet, but you know, the open tutorial part I think needs some tweaking. And then the last thing, it says, is there any aspect of the course that you're finding particularly helpful? Again, some people were just sort of saying, and some of the anatomy might have been helpful earlier on. And it says here, a few people noted they would like to have all the material for the week uploaded at the same time. And so I had actually caught myself, I'd been a bit slack for a week or two on not getting the stuff up on Mondays. And so it was just a reminder that they were really liking that. And I need to make sure that that everything was posted by Monday evening. And then one other thing I wanted to add was a few students had written something to this effect, sort of saying, I really enjoyed well, not I really enjoyed the course, but I appreciated how transparent you were with us about why the course was set up the way it was. And so I think that's important. You know, I had a lot of stuff due at the end. I had the final project, I had the final exam, and I had the discussion board, and that all happened in the last sort of 10 days of the course. And so I was very clear with them that all that stuff was cumulative assessment, and we needed to make sure to the School of Physio has a rule that 40% of the mark has to be allotted to a final exam. And I got around that by not having a final exam, is to having 40% of the mark being cumulative and all happening near the end. And so I was very clear about that's why everything is so busy at the end. And I was also clear about the assessments and why I chose them. So for example, I told them the quizzes every 2 weeks were to help them to stay on top of the material. And then I told them that they needed to have that basic material so that when they got to the higher stakes midterm and final, they'd have to sort of put that stuff together. And so it's quite clear that the quizzes are going to be a little bit easier, and both the midterm and the final are going to be a little bit more difficult. I just thought it'd be best to be open and honest about why I'd done the things the way that I did, so they had a better idea of why we were doing things. And then briefly, just so you know a little bit more, there was one instructor of record for this course. That was me, and we had 2 guest lecturers. I had 3 TAs. 2 were for marking and were present at the open tutorials. They were kind of the content experts. In hindsight, they weren't needed for the open tutorials. I would have just had them for the marking, because obviously marking all those projects was quite onerous. And then I had 1 TA to help me manage the Brightspace. I would say this was the biggest resource I had. She helped me manage the discussion board, helped me input all the quizzes and exams, and then there's a lot of accommodations, you know, with 130 students. I think we had 22 different accommodations, and so she helped me manage all those. And so that was really helpful for me.
So one question, Amira, related to that is, did you also contribute to the discussion boards?
I contributed by putting up the instructions and saying this is what we need to do. And then the TA who managed the Brightspace, she was the one contributing to the discussion boards for me on my behalf. But that was part of why what we used her for was to maintain that sense of community and maintain the engagement. So she checked the discussion board every couple of days and would let me know if there was something that I needed to answer. You know, if there was a question that I needed to answer, I would then go in and look for it. And she'd also kind of summarize things for me at the end of the week, saying, a lot of the students are asking this question, maybe you need to clarify it. And if that was the case, I'd clarify it in one of my weekly overviews.
Great, thank you.
And then, just as things for what I consider next time, sorry, this finger pointer is still stuck up there, is I would clearly state the quizzes and exams were open book. And so I had said at the beginning that they weren't open book, and I had trusted the students would not use their materials, and I created the tests to make sure that if they were sort of at disadvantage, they'd run out of time. But I think what I would do next time is say that they could be open book and put a little bit more time and energy into putting more critical thinking questions. I think that's one thing I would change, is change not the structure. I'd still make them true and false and multiple choice, but I would let the students access the materials, because I think in real life, you're never going to have to memorize different things. You should have or you would have access to them. And so I think also by preparing your materials, you're actually studying. So I would, for next time, if this course was solely run online, I would make the quizzes and exams open book. I would make the open tutorials shorter and a bit less resource. So for example, there was no need to have a 3-hour open tutorial. I think I would probably do 1 hour 3 times a week. And that's not necessarily onerous for me, because if no one came, I just did some of my own work. And then I would also have a junk drawer, which would be a content folder on Brightspace, because I was finding I would have to update things, and you know, I'd go through the quiz, I'd review the quiz and have to explain it. and I'd record it, and I had nowhere to put these things. And so I think going forward, I would have this junk drawer where I would just keep putting things that I didn't really have anywhere else to put. So that's a big thing I wish I had put in the course. But yeah, that was a quick race through what I did this summer. And so that's it.
So we do have another question for you, Amira.
Yeah.
About your assessments. If you could speak maybe just generally, again, review how much of those were group work, and then I'll read the question word for word for you. That question is based on in physio, the departmental consensus has been that the majority of student evaluation should be individual, usually at least 60% as opposed to group work. And it looks like that your course varied from this. This has caused some grumbling among students in the past, where some courses are perceived as unfair and others are easier or less stressful. For those of people who are teaching physio courses in the fall and in other departments, I suppose with this kind of departmental rules around group versus individual work, do you think this might become an issue?
Actually, it's an interesting question. I didn't have any group projects for it. Like, all of these marks were individual marks. So it was individual project. It had been a group project previously. This was a 10% group project, but the entire 100% of the assessment was individual. So this project was an individual project for a couple of reasons. One, because the project was going to be worth so much of their mark, I didn't want them to have to rely on anyone else, and it was purely going to be their own work. And two, I thought with everyone being all over the country and trying to manage this online, trying to then organize group work was going to be really onerous. And so I didn't have any group work at all.
Is adding
Perhaps
something, would you consider adding group work in the future?
Oh, what I said. You know, if it was a completely online course, I would not include group work. No, one of the other OT instructors had run a course at the same time as me, and one of the struggles the students were having was trying to organize virtually meeting with their groups. And so I think if the course is online, I was more comfortable not having group work, and so I don't think I would. This was a bit groupy, I guess. The discussion board marks, they were in their own little groups and they could talk to each other about things. And I encourage people to use Collaborate Ultra and study as a group if they wanted to. But if it was a purely online course, I wouldn't change it. I would not add any percentage for group work.
And the discussion board is one I remember is one of your learning outcomes specifically was around the interprofessional communication. So that applied that, right?
Yeah, and so that was, I would say, the one thing that was a bit difficult to hit with this course being online is that IPE, or interprofessional education. And so we made sure that within these discussion groups, we had half OTs and half physios. And so they were sort of forced to speak to each other and interact with each other that way. And then when they watched the different educational artifacts, of course, some were physio presentations and some were OT presentations. But I mean, I don't think you can necessarily replace a group project with a discussion board. That being said, I weighed the pros and cons of it, and I just felt that adding a group project with 6 people and trying to organize all that while it was online was just going to be too onerous.
Thanks so much. No one has posted any more questions at this point.
Okay.
People are saying thank you. And is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up? Or
yeah, you know what? I think once you get into the teaching online, it's quite nice. I think going forward, if I had my way about it, this course would sort of be a hybrid course where I would have, because now I have quite a compilation of online materials, and so I think having some of the stuff online and then having the students come together perhaps for different, the projects, for example, they could come together and work on a project, or we come together and write the exams together in a room. I think there's room for a hybrid course. I don't think things necessarily need to be completely online or completely in person, depending when COVID finishes, or if it ever finishes.
All right. Well, thank you very much. people are looking forward to perhaps reviewing your slides in the future. I don't know if we're going to share those, but if so, that'd be great. Oh, we do have another question here. Do you think this course could be offered in this time frame in the future, even if students are in clinical placement during this time, which they usually are? They can turn offering it in the summer versus fall, I think.
Oh, I think it could. I mean, we didn't change. It was 3 months. It's 3 months in the fall, and it was 3 months in the summer, so it wasn't condensed time-wise. I think having this course run while students are in clinical placement would be too onerous on them. Typically in the fall, they just take this course and one other course. And so to have them be in clinic all day long and then try and do this course, it's a 6-credit course already condensed into 3 months, and then on top of clinical work, I think that'd be unreasonable to expect. Does that answer the question?
Yes, I think so. Thank you very much. So, thank you very much, everyone. And if you have any other follow-up questions, we'll be sure to address those. Yes. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Les, don't forget